morning, good afternoon, or maybe even good evening. A very warm welcome to this Gallery Teachers workshop on the IELTS speaking exam. Just to get started, I would like to share my screen with you. Now, I'm going to spend the next 30 minutes or so taking a deep dive into this really very interesting topic. But before we do that, I would just like to ask you for one important favor. Now, it is said that if you are able to check your emails while also attending a webinar or a call, then you probably shouldn't be in the webinar. So what I'd like to ask you to do is just to take the next 30 minutes just to relax, really enjoy the topic, close down all your other tabs, don't check your emails, and really immerse yourself in this workshop experience with me, Nikki Partridge. Okay, let's move on. So what are we going to be looking at today? Well, we are going to be looking at mainly the second part of the IELTS speaking test. And I have a few aims that I would like to achieve by the end of this session. My first aim is to bust some myths. We all know that IELTS is a very high stakes exam. Candidates also often have really important reasons for taking this exam, and there is a huge amount of information out there. A lot of that information is not really trustworthy, and it is important for teachers and also for candidates to really understand what information is valid and what information isn't really to be trusted. An understanding of this is going to be key to really being able to achieve the score that you want in this really, really tricky at times exam. Now, IELTS and teaching IELTS and taking IELTS can be overwhelming. Over the last many years of being involved in this exam, I have seen how really difficult it can be to give the right kinds of study aims to students and for students to really understand them. So I'm going to suggest a few strategies that can be used in the second part of the speaking test. And then finally, I would like to be able to increase your confidence. As I said, this can be a really overwhelming exam and often very high stakes for the candidates. And it's important for teachers and students, candidates, to feel confident going into this test. Okay, but before we go any further, I think it is also very important for me to introduce myself. So why are you going to spend the next 30 minutes listening to me? So let me tell you. As I've already said, my name is Nikki Partridge, and I am an IELTS expert, a senior teacher. I have been involved in teaching the IELTS and assessing the IELTS for almost 20 years. My experience has been with learners, taking people from foundation level all the way through to levels 6 or maybe 7, and also helping candidates to achieve very, very high bands. I've worked with students online and offline. I've also worked with native speaking students. And finally, of course, I've more recently been involved with training teachers to actually pass on this knowledge, to transfer their knowledge to other teachers who teach this important exam. I am based in Cardiff, which is the capital of Wales in the United Kingdom. And I'm also the owner of a language school accredited by the British Council called Pear Tree Languages. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of this exam. So, as I said, we are going to be focusing today on the speaking test, and we are going to be talking about the academic exam. Now, if you are a bit more of a pro when it comes to the IELTS, you will know that there are two types of IELTS tests. There's a general training test, and there's also an academic test. If you really know your onions, then you will know that the speaking and the listening modules are exactly the same for both of the task types, the test types. However, the reading and the writing are different. So as today we will be focusing on the speaking part of the exam, then this would be applicable if you are interested in academic module and also in the general training test. If you are a newbie to the IELTS, then here is a quick overview of the timings of the different parts of the exam. Also, you should probably know that the exam is scored according to bands. So going from band 1 to band 9. So band 9 would be considered an expert user, a native speaker, okay, of English. So really, it isn't possible to fail the IELTS. Your pass or fail will very much depend on what your goal is in terms of your band score. So if you are aiming for a 6 and you are given a 6.5, then effectively you have passed. Okay. If your goal is a 5 and you are awarded 4.5, then effectively for your own personal reasons, then you would have failed. Okay, so let's move on to our next slide. Okay, so as I've mentioned, the main focus of today is to talk about the speaking test. All right, so just a quick overview of the test in general before we really take that deep dive on part 2. So the speaking test is 11 to 14 minutes long in total. It's not a very long test at all. The time usually flies by. There are 3 parts. So part 1 and part 3 are both 4 to 5 minutes long, with the first part focusing more on personal type questions and the third part being more abstract. Okay. If we really look at part 2, we will see that this is 3 to 4 minutes long and it is called the long turn. So this is the part of the test where the candidate will speak completely uninterrupted for up to 2 minutes. All right. Okay. Procedure. So what is going to happen exactly in this second part of the exam? Well, as in the whole exam, in the IELTS, there is only a candidate and an examiner. There isn't a separate examiner or a separate interlocutor, and the candidates do not do this exam in pairs, okay? So they will do it one-to-one with the examiner. And although it is now possible to take certain parts of the IELTS online, the face-to-face speaking test is still the only way to do the speaking test. The tests are recorded and the person, the examiner who is speaking to the candidate is also going to decide the first set of results for the candidate. So moving on to have a look at part 2. What will happen is that the examiner will first of all present the candidate with a topic. Okay, now these topics are general interest topics. They are not topics that will require any kind of preparation on the part of the candidate. They are not news-based or science-based or require any sort of research or prior knowledge. They are topics of general interest. And as such, they are almost infinite. It is likely that a candidate may receive a topic on almost any subject. Okay. Next, the candidate will have 1 minute to make their notes. So they will be given a pen and paper in the exam. They do not take the pen and paper into the exam with them. They are given that material on the spot. And then they'll have a minute to make their notes. The examiner will start and stop that minute. They then have 1 to 2 minutes to speak. So they must speak for a minimum of 1 minute. If they do not reach the minute, then they will be expected to somehow fill in that time. So it's very, very important for the candidates to speak for a minute. 2 minutes is the maximum. Okay. And then depending on how long the candidate has spoken for during the long term, the examiner may then ask 1 or 2 rounding off questions if they need to fill in that time. Okay, so if the candidate hasn't managed to reach the 2 minutes, then they will certainly be given some supplementary questions, always on that topic. Okay, good. So now we've got an overview of the procedure. Let's have a look at what a long-term topic may actually look like. Okay, so I'm going to just pause here, let you catch your breath. I know that there's been quite a bit of information so far, And I would just like to give you a minute, okay? No need for a pen and paper at this stage, just to have a read of what is on my screen. Okay, so hopefully you've had an opportunity just to read the information in front of you there on the screen. For many of you, this will certainly not be the first time that you've seen a candidate task card like this, okay? But here you can see the full range of different pieces of information that the candidate will be presented with, okay? So the candidate would see the task card only. The rounding off questions would give you an idea of the types of questions that could be used by the examiner to fill in the time, again, relating back to that topic. Okay, let's take a little bit of a look at that in more detail now. All right, so we're going to focus in on the candidate's task card. And what I would like to do now is just to spend a moment thinking a bit about what kinds of answers a candidate may give to such a topic, okay? So the topic we've got here is to describe something which you own, which is important to you, okay? Now here I've got a couple of do's and don'ts at the bottom of this screen here, and my number one don't is through many years of experience of being involved in IELTS assessment procedures. When presented with a topic like this, it is important that the candidate doesn't choose anything that is too sensitive or personal, okay? Under the stress and the pressure of an exam, it may be very tempting for a candidate to think of a photograph or maybe a wedding ring or something that is incredibly close to them, okay? Personally, I wouldn't recommend that because, as I've said, in the stress of the exam, if the candidate finds themselves getting a little bit emotional, then the fact they've chosen a topic which may lead them down emotional paths is not really good for the exam. Okay, it's also really important, so this is a do, that the candidate chooses something creative. Okay, so in answer to a task like this, I would personally advise avoiding things like a mobile phone or an iPad or something very run-of-the-mill, okay? The candidate really needs to stand out in the mind of the examiner from all of the other candidates. So if they're able to choose a topic that is somehow creative, this is also going to help them to increase their band score really in terms of the interest that they are able to hold. And the final thing is that they must stay positive, okay? And this last point is very valid for the whole of the exam. If at any point they start to become demotivated or uncooperative or giving very short answers, this really isn't going to be helpful for the whole dynamic of the exam. Okay, so really, really key here, not to choose anything too personal, to be creative, and also to stay positive. Okay, so sticking with the same topic, okay, so we're still on this topic of something you own, which is really important to you. I think that as a teacher, it is always really nice when you try to personalize the lessons around the individual students, okay, and maybe share with them, well, if I was doing this exam, what would I choose? So I've done that. And personally, if I was going to do this exam, I would choose my signed concert poster by a Welsh singer-songwriter called Cerys Matthews. Now, I've actually put it on the screen for you here. I took a quick picture of it. Now, of course, in the real exam, there is no opportunity to bring in props or realia or anything like that, or photos. This is just more to demonstrate to you how you could engage students and to give candidates an idea of the kinds of topics that would be something very personal, but it isn't something sensitive. Okay, it also, a topic like this would also provide lots of opportunities to bring in extra experiences, okay, to talk a little bit about the concert, maybe to talk about the music in general, which could be a hobby. So there's lots of opportunity to go outside the box of just the actual topic. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so we've had a look at the overview of the exam. We've had a look at the different parts of the exam, of the speaking exam, and we've had a look at a sample topic card. And the sample topic card was to describe something that is important to you. Now, in terms of strategies for candidates, the most important strategy is the timing, okay? So timing absolutely is everything when it comes to this part of the exam, all right? Awareness of the minute, the note-making minute, awareness of the 1 to 2 minutes that should be used to speak is really, really crucial. And this is something that has to be practiced and trained over and over again. One of the things that I've often told people over the years is that training for IELTS is a bit like training for a sporting event. Okay, so in the same way that if you were going to run a marathon, you would need to do lots of different training activities on all the different parts of your body, and it would be absolutely impossible to wake up one morning and just run that marathon. You have to see training for this IELTS exam in exactly the same way, and giving students, candidates, lots of practice over and over again at the different parts of this exam. Wherever possible, simulating exam conditions is really key to managing the expectations of the student for when they get into that exam room. And of course, by doing that, they will feel well prepared, they will feel trained, and they will feel more confident to succeed in the real exam. So a few top tips when it comes to timing, okay? My first tip, this might sound very, very obvious, but it's definitely worth saying, is to time yourself. So by time yourself, I'm talking about the student, the candidate. Time how long a minute actually is. Time how long 1 to 2 minutes actually are, so that you start to get a really deep awareness of the time, so that at no moment does the candidate stop the examiner and say, how much time have I got left? Have I spoken for a minute? Okay, all of this has to be well practiced and very well under control before even stepping into that exam room. So there are a couple of ways that you can do this, as well as recording yourself speaking, doing sample task types. You can use something like VoiceSpice. Okay, so VoiceSpice is a free recording tool, which you can get off the internet. You can record yourself. A candidate, a student can then send that to their teacher. The teacher can request to have some audio files via VoiceSpice. It's very easy to use. It doesn't require any kind of sign-in, and it's free. Or even easier could be to use voice memos on a phone. I think pretty much all mobile devices have the ability to record yourself. So depending on the platforms or the relationship that a student has with their teacher, they can record a voice memo, which will clearly show all of the timings. They can send that to the teacher through a range of different options. And this provides a great way of getting that training, and also is something that the candidate can do alone, okay, and can do over and over again. And by recording yourself, this is a great way of listening out for grammatical errors, for mispronounced phonemes, for irregular chunking in pronunciation, and is just a fantastic way of personally, because nobody else needs to hear it apart from yourself and your teacher, the teacher if the student wants feedback, of really getting to grips with any errors ironing them out, okay, and then getting into a position to really start to get a great score on the IELTS. From the teacher's perspective, they can assign certain things that they would like the student to focus on when they are recording and timing themselves, okay? So really, really targeted practice of, for example, grammar errors, as I've already mentioned. When it comes to the minute that the candidates have to get ready, to get ready what they actually want to talk about, it is absolutely critical, crucial that minute is maximized, okay? So many times I've seen candidates actually try to use that minute to write out whole sentences or to really write an entire speech or script within that minute. Obviously, this is absolutely impossible. And the candidates, the students need to be trained on how to make mind maps of ideas, okay, rather than forming any kind of complete sentence, how to organize those notes so that as they're moving through their 1 to 2 minutes, they can quickly refer to them and see where they are on the page to give themselves some prompts if they get lost. And that the language that they write on those on the notes, it's also language that can be quickly adapted, okay? So you're going to be helping them to find language that they can then adapt to any kind of topic that they are given. Because although, as I mentioned a couple of slides earlier, the topics are infinite, they often overlap in some way. Okay, just to give you a very brief example, if we're looking at the topic of people, it could be a topic on describing someone you admire. It could be a topic on describing a teacher who influenced you. It could be a topic on describing a family member who's made an impact on your life. Okay, but all of those topics are all about people. Is it possible to simply learn how to describe one person and then give your student the skills to adapt that topic depending on what exact question is asked? Okay, so little bit of food for thought there. And lastly, don't be afraid to tell a white lie, but don't tell a whopper. Okay, so this is really important. If so let's go back to what I was just saying about people. Okay, so let's take, for example, that you've helped your student to describe a person. So they have lots of good adjectives, they have some idioms to describe people, and then they've modeled that on their uncle. But then the topic is to describe a teacher. Okay, what I'm suggesting here is that they could simply tell a white lie. So describe their uncle in the context of a teacher. Okay, so they're using all the same language, all the same adjectives. They're just telling a little white lie that in fact that wasn't their teacher that they were describing, it was their uncle. But it doesn't matter, nobody cares, and it really, really doesn't matter at all. Okay, however, if they tell a complete whopper, as in a very, very big lie, like any kind of lies, it's really hard to sustain a lie, okay? The white lie has to have a basis of truth, okay? So don't encourage your students to just invent something completely out of the blue. It will be very hard under the stress of the exam for them to manage that situation. And it's, unless you're an extremely good liar, the examiner will always be able to tell when they are just being told a lie and that it's absolutely not true at all. And they're likely to tangle themselves up in knots, lose their confidence, and the whole thing will break down. Okay, good. So last part of our workshop today is all about getting into the mind of the examiner. Okay, so very often people think that, that the IELTS exam is some great mysterious beast and it's absolutely impossible to interpret what the examiners really want. We hear all kinds of horror stories of people who went to that center and got a 6, and then another center and got an 8, and that there's this kind of idea that is somehow all chance and tricks and magic and Harry Potter, okay? And that is absolutely not true. So IELTS is a very standard exam. It is standardized all over the world, okay? And it really isn't that hard to get into the mind of an examiner, because IELTS has given us something, a wonderful gift, which is freely available to all teachers and to all students and to all candidates, and it's called the Public Band Descriptors. Okay, the Public Band Descriptors, and you can access them in about 3 clicks of your mouse by going to IELTS.org. We are going to have a look at some of them in a moment. But these Public Band Descriptors really tell you, they're our roadmap for how to succeed in this exam. Okay, and we are going to have a look at them now as they relate to the speaking part of this exam. Okay, so I strongly suggest that you download the slides and that you will be able to have a look at these from the comfort of your own office chair in your own time. We certainly don't have the time to go through them in details now, but as I said, they are publicly available. Now, one of the things that may immediately jump out at you is that I've only included bands 5 to 9, okay? And there's a really good reason for that. And my reason is that, in my opinion, if you have a student, if you are a student or you have a student who is lower than a 5, a band 5 overall, so we're talking about B1, low B1 and below, IELTS is not the exam for that candidate, not yet, okay? They're not there yet on their journey of learning English as a second language to even really consider taking the IELTS exam. I've seen many examples of organizations, maybe government ministries or businesses who require people to do IELTS, and they say, oh, we just need to see where they are. It's an assessment. No, IELTS is not the exam to be used as an assessment tool if the person is not really even at a 5, okay? What you will see from this is that IELTS is largely, I would say at least 50%, well, more than that in the speaking context, general English, okay? It is very difficult, if not impossible, for a person to just simply train themselves into a good IELTS score without having a really solid basis of general English. So really, if you're a student or you are a student and you're not yet at 5, really you need to go back, take a deep breath, take a step back and just say, you know what, I need to do a little bit more work on my general English, because otherwise setting people on the IELTS path too early is demotivating and also very stressful. And it's going to be very unhelpful in the long term to how that person feels about learning English in general. Okay, so looking at the lexical resource and the grammatical range and accuracy, because really when we are talking about the speaking exam, this is the golden nugget. This is what everybody always wants to know, okay? Usually people are most preoccupied with how to get from 6 to 7 or maybe even to 8, okay? 7 is generally considered a bit of a magic number when it comes to IELTS, but very often people would like to get even more than 7 and have very high ambitions. Okay, and I think the key differences can really be summarized here in the lexical resource and in the grammatical range and accuracy, okay? And this is taken straight now from the band descriptors. And it relates to range and to accuracy, okay? If a student is looking to get more than 6, they have to have range and they have to have accuracy in their lexis and in their grammar. Okay, so if we look for a moment at lexical resource band 7, okay, we're looking at, I would say the second bullet point is especially key here, uses less common and idiomatic vocabulary and shows some awareness of style and collocation with some inappropriate choices, okay? So what we're really talking about here is the ability to use natural English, and not all the time, not 100% of the time, but often. Okay, often. And as teachers, it is possible here, if you have a student who's really good 6, to teach them, to pre-teach them a range of natural English idioms and expressions that they can find ways to work into this exam. Okay, and with training and practice, it can seem accidental, but it's actually deliberate. Okay. And if they are able to do that appropriately, okay, and not to use a strange idiom in a circumstance that doesn't quite fit, or just to have one idiom and use it again and again and again, which often also happens, they'll be able to get a 7 for LR, for lexical resource. Okay. The same with the grammar. Now, nobody's saying that to get a 7, they have to be absolutely word perfect and they can't make any mistakes. No, that's not what these band descriptors are saying. But they cannot be making basic errors. So what is a basic error? Well, missing an S off a third person, regularly not using articles. Okay, these would still be considered basic errors, which are going to be marked much lower at 5, 6. Okay, so if you have a very fluent student who's never quite been able to grasp that there is such a thing as single and plural and an S has to go on the third person, they're not going to get 7 for grammar. Okay, so first of all, they must be making sure that those basic errors are minimized. And if there are errors, that they are making them when they are trying to form much more complicated language, okay, not at the basic level. And then just to take that one step further, before I'm almost out of time for today, it's important for the 8, okay, that not only are they almost perfect, okay, so no basic errors, very, very, very few errors, but all of this is able to be done flexibly, okay? You can see the word flexibly is in 8 on lexical resource and 8 on grammar. Okay, so we're talking about somebody who's very close to starting to be like a native speaker. Native speakers make mistakes all the time. Perhaps I've even made 1 or 2 giving this presentation, if you listen back very carefully, all the time. But it has to be a mistake that isn't really typical of the speech, okay? And when they are using idioms or natural English, phrasal verbs, they are totally natural. Okay, great. So just before I wrap up for today, I do hope that this has been useful for you, that you've been able to grab some good tips here that you can apply straight away to your own learning if you are a student, and start to implement quickly if you are a teacher. My biggest takeaway right now would be to download and familiarize yourself with the public band descriptors. They are the key, okay? They are the key. And please do remember that IELTS is not a mythical beast. It is just an exam like any other exam. And if you study hard, you have good general English, you are familiar with the band descriptors, and you practice, 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 especially on your timings, you will be able to succeed, okay? So thank you very much for watching. Please do leave your questions in the workshop forum, and I look forward to seeing you another day.